Flashout 3 is, unsurprisingly, the third installment of the Flashout series from developer and publisher Jujubee. It's been over 8 years since its predecessor was released, so Flashout 3 seeks to breathe new life into the formula and bring it up to modern standards. With that in mind, is Flashout 3 worth picking up on PC? In Flashout 3, players take on the role of either Bea or Silas. Both characters have their own backstory and special weapon, but that's about it. There isn't much in the way of a campaign here, just a succession of increasingly tough tournaments. And while this might be a missed opportunity, the gameplay itself makes up for this somewhat. The game throws you headfirst into a series of races straight after picking your character. These can be standard races with 8 competitors, or more complex elimination and time trial events. To keep things interesting, the standard races let you use weaponry, and you'll be able to fire away at your opponents throughout the race to slow them down or respawn them behind you. But regardless of your mode, the weapons overheat quickly, so you have to be careful about using them too frequently. When it comes to the racetracks themselves, you'll quickly spot the familiar boost pads that significantly increase your speed, and trying to hit all of these is essential to winning your standard races. Though you'll also have to master braking and air braking to control your ship during sharp turns. Elimination races are by far the most intense, forcing you to stay near the front as the timer counts down, periodically eliminating the last player, until only one remains. If you're a fan of shooting things, there's a chaotic destruction race mode, where you accumulate points for every racer you destroy with your weapons. Destroy the most opponents while racing, and you'll be crowned victor. Lastly, you have the time trial races, that are the most simplistic, just with set times you have to beat. By this point, you might have realized Flashout 3 doesn't reinvent the wheel. It follows a tried and trusted formula that has been established by the iconic progenitor of the anti-gravity racing genre, Wipeout. In fact, if you've played Wipeout, chances are you'll find Flashout 3 adequate enough to scratch that anti-gravity racing itch. The downside for Flashout 3 is that Wipeout is just too good a series of games. Flashout 3 feels extremely watered down in comparison, and has a distinct budget look and feel to it. It's quite noticeable from the get-go when you immediately spot bland and flat textures, while the Victory Podium cinematic looks incredibly janky. Another issue is that while the controls in Flashout 3 are generally fine, there's something about it that feels quite stiff and not as fluid as it could be. If you played Wipeout recently, you'll notice it immediately. When it comes to the graphics, many racetracks and visual effects can look great, but there's a ton of inconsistency, and some tracks look a lot more appealing than others. Weapon sound effects are at least decent, and the explosions sound powerful, especially when you're blowing up other opponents on the track. The one consistently good element was the soundtrack, which is filled with catchy techno music that fits the game perfectly. Other than that, there's little I consider memorable about the presentation. So overall, Flashout 3 is an indie anti-gravity racing title that might be worth playing given its rather cheap price point. Having played quite a few similar racing games in my time, Flashout 3 is serviceable, but it isn't going to be stealing you away from the greats such as Wipeout, or, if you want a more recent indie title for comparison, Redout. It needs a lot more to it if it wants to compete, and that simply isn't the case here. Now that said, there are still plenty of hours of enjoyment to be had here, and while it's not anywhere as refined as its peers, it is still fun. The game also supports split-screen co-op and has VR support, which is a plus point to consider. There are also demo versions available on all platforms, so we'd suggest you give it a try for yourself and see if you like it or not before committing to a full purchase.